Well, I was working at Stanford when I was doing my PhD in the late 80s and early 90s. My advisor was Byron Reeves, and he and Cliff Nass were working at that time. This was before they wrote The Media Equation, the book that sort of brought together both of their areas of research. Cliff, responses to computers, and Byron, an idea that he called, when I was just a student and just sort of deciding what I wanted to. I was obviously interested in these kinds of things, but I hadn't heard it discussed in these ways. He talked about jungle TV, quote unquote, the idea that we are hardwired through evolution so that if you're watching a television screen and a tiger or other wild animal seems to run toward the screen, it doesn't, you can still sit there, you don't run away screaming, like the train example that Wyndon used in his talk this morning, where when they first projected a large image of a train approaching a camera, people supposedly ran out of the theater screaming because, oh, the train's coming, because they weren't used to the medium yet. But the same thing at some level, the argument is, it happens with television, because even though you were well acquainted with the fact that it's just a TV screen and there's no wild animal coming at me, at some level your body is saying, wait a minute, and you have some sort of reaction that reflects the fact that you treat it as real, even though cognitively, from the top-down brain, you're telling yourself, no, nothing, no problem. But bottom up, your body is reacting. So as he developed those ideas and we did some initial studies, I became more and more interested in it. And I don't think either of us knew particularly about the presence literature or the telepresence idea, related to either Cliff or Byron's work, but the Presence Journal started in '92, and as I struggled for something to call these responses that you have that reflect that evolutionary, natural response that you have, that unevolved, probably a bad way to put it, but that unevolved process. First, I called them natural responses, and then direct responses, because you're responding not to the symbol of an object on the TV screen, but the object itself, the referent, the thing that the symbol refers to, so I call it direct as opposed to an indirect response. But none of those terms seemed quite right, and then when I started learning about the presence literature, that sort of gelled, and then that's how I got into applying that literature to what I was interested in and doing more research. And then Frank Baioca asked me at one point to write a short piece about presence for the Journal of Computer-Mediated Communication, a special issue he was doing, and that's what turned into the very long piece that Teresa and I wrote that was originally supposed to be short. But as we started looking at the literatures that we both knew from communication and from other fields, and especially psychology, we realized that there was something even more broad and interesting going on than just the specific things that we had talked about, and so it became a larger effort, and I've been interested in it since. So. Why am I still interested? I'll tell you, the Presence listserv, I post most, unless I'm here or something, I post a news article every day, every weekday, that illustrates some use of, they rarely use the term telepresence, but it's some phenomenon from the news that reflects this idea from some element of, sometimes it's about hospital care where they have robots going down the hallways of hospitals or remote telesurgery, or art projects that involve giving people some sort of unusual experience that fools them about the nature of technology, the telepresence high-end video systems, on and on and on. And I've posted close to 2,000 of these things over the last 8 years, and the fact that I keep seeing these things and they keep interesting me, I get to read them and then I get to post them, and in the process I'm hopefully broadening the perspective of the people who are subscribing to the listserv. They see, oh yeah, I can see why that's presence and why that's presence, and yet they're all almost every one is like a really cool phenomenon. It's really interesting to me. And so that's what keeps me, as I keep seeing the applicability of the concept, the phenomena keeps showing up in so many different ways, I'm more and more convinced that it's a central concept and also has great potential for good or bad, which makes it interesting, because it can be used to give people great experiences, but it also could be used for bad things. So all of that makes it very interesting, I think. There have been a lot of them. If you subscribe to the broader definitions of presence, not just mine, but I mean many people consider it a larger concept than just the high-end technology that people are sort of still keeping in the scientific labs and stuff, and that haven't reached the public. Then you'd say, well, we've had applications for, since cave paintings, as Winan said this morning in his talk, because they were carved on rocks chosen so that they could give depth to the animals that were appropriate to the way they wanted the viewer of it to perceive the animal. All these technologies, even I mean, that's about as far as back as you could go. But then even in the 20th century, just basic television, that thing about relationships that people feel with the television personalities, that was written. It's called parasocial relationships or parasocial interaction. That was originally proposed in 1956 by Horton and Wohl in a just a thought piece that they wrote, and it rings true today if you read it. It's like, yeah, people were having presence experiences with that very low technology. It wasn't 3D, it wasn't color, it was just black and white TV. And so I think the public has had these experiences for many years. Simulation rides are maybe the most sophisticated out there, but of course they're set up to reproduce a specific experience for each person who goes through. They're not as interactive. But when video games have now leaped into the realm of the Nintendo stuff, where you can actually physically move and interact with the images, it's there already, I'd say. So it's just only a question of where it's going. Well, Cisco recently said that they were going to make the telepresence system that they have, the high definition conferencing system, available via a set-top box, some sort of set-top box that you would have at home, and eventually it'd be maybe even incorporated into your regular, entertainment box. and so you could use your high definition television at home. More and more people have high definition televisions, to have a conversation with people at remote sites, just as you do in these boardrooms. Obviously, you wouldn't all have the identical, meeting table to sit around, but it would be a good illusion. And I just went. I don't know if I should admit this for posterity here, but I just recently got an HD television. For the last 25 years or so, even though I've done studies of screen size and I'm interested in, been interested in presence and everything, I just watched a 20-inch regular, TV, tube TV, and I recently bought a 50-inch plasma high-definition TV. So a huge change, from the very small and blurry to the very large and clear. And I find fascinating how different things look on that television, and how in a good high-definition signal, like a news broadcast, where the people look at you because that's the nature of the format. They directly address you, that if you get in the right position and you sort of will yourself into it, you can feel like they're, in a much more vivid sense than in the past, you can feel like they're talking to you. They're in your room. And so I can imagine how compelling it would be to have that new Cisco system that they're talking about, so that I could actually be interacting with somebody. So imagine, not just for me, but this is what goes under the category of doing good with the telepresence technology, and people have talked about this as something that may happen in 5 or 10 years. If you could talk to your relatives who live in another city, or just hang out with them, you don't have to have a conversation. You could just feel like you're in the same room with them and spend time with them, and they are, for all intents, I mean, obviously you can't hug them through the screen, but even with just the technology that we have now, if you can make if you can make it cheap enough, if the bandwidth can be made available and the technology at both ends can be standardized, then you can have lunch with your parents or a spouse or a significant other wherever they are, and imagine how compelling that would be and what a benefit that would be to people. So those are the kind of things that first come to mind when you say. Of course, there's all kinds of things you could imagine that you might want, but that's the first thing that comes to mind. Well, there definitely are ethical issues, and here's where the definition as an illusion of non-mediation, where some people say, well, that's a bad thing because you're being fooled. As I say, most times you want to be fooled, and that's okay with you. But if you're suspending your objection to being fooled, that's one thing. But if you're doing it and you're not aware of it, if you're being fooled and you're not aware of it, then that raises all kinds of ethical problems. And just one example, when you watched the news in sometime in the 90s, I think, Cokie Roberts of ABC News was supposedly doing a live stand-up in front of the White House. She's a network reporter for issues and events in the Capitol, and so she appeared to be in front of the White House doing this report for the main anchor back in the studio, and then it was revealed that no, she wasn't actually in front of the White House. They used a blue screen, and it was a rainy day or something, and I don't know what the reason was, but for practical reasons they took that shortcut. That's no big deal if you think, well, I thought she was outside on the lawn of the White House reporting and she was really, but imagine if you extend that, then you don't know what to believe. You don't know what's authentic and what isn't, and pretty soon you don't know basically what's real and what's not, what's mediated and what's not, and to the extent that you don't have control over that knowledge, that decision, that's very bad. So I'd say that's the core of the telepresence ethics issues. And then there's all kinds of things that are just controversial, like we were just talking about how you could be, watching and talking to somebody in another place, somebody who's close to you. Well, imagine when you take the next step and you add haptics and you're able to actually interact with them. And imagine if they cannot be a real person, but a computer-generated person, like an avatar represents another person, but it could be also a computer-generated, character. Then you could have sex with the virtual character. You raise all kinds of fascinating. It's the same thing they have even now with child pornography that's created with, there is no child filmed. It's just they create a graphic representation, a virtual child, and show it in the pornography. And then the courts have to decide, well, is that pornography? Is that illegal? Child pornography is illegal in the States, but is it pornography if I create a digital? There was no child. So then you have to think, well, why is it illegal? What is the reason for it being illegal? And therefore, does this get you out of that problem? And so there's all kinds of really, if you see what I mean, all kinds of intriguing and important, issues. Because with that pornography example, if the main issue that people have with child pornography is that the child is being abused, which would certainly be a reasonable concern, well, there's no child being abused here. And yet sometimes they take pictures of children and then they modify them, and so then you might say, well, the privacy of that person, or especially if the child wasn't willing, maybe even that's immoral and therefore it's a problem. Or are you concerned with the effect on the consumer of child pornography, in which case it doesn't matter whether it's virtual or not. So, it gets really dicey, and that's another reason all these questions are related, because that's another reason I'm so interested in the phenomena and in the study of them. I think, we're evolving relatively quickly the ability to make more convincing reproductions of reality, but there are limits in terms of memory, storage, bandwidth. And Second Life, for instance, is a great prototype in a lot of ways for the kind of virtual world that everything is constructible. You go in and create whatever you want. But I've read a lot of complaints from people who say this is just so glitch filled, and they can't keep up with the number of users who are adding to the system, and how it's just the same problems as with PCs. You always have to buy a new one because they're getting now you don't have enough RAM, you don't have enough processing speed, and whatever. So those things are always sort of natural bottlenecks, and that hurts the ability of people to study them, of course, too, because we could do better studies if we had the technologies we envision for the future, but they're not here yet. We might have cutting edge technologies, but they're still used to have all this bulkiness that gets in the way. So a lot of those limits are being, they're constantly being, like Moore's law, about how fast the technology evolves, computer technology. I think it dictates every time we come up against a limit where it's like, oh, well, we've made the circuits as small as we can make them. So now what do? Somebody comes up with a new way of doing it. They shift the paradigm and find a new way to solve the problem. So I'm fairly convinced that the progress will continue. It's just people just have to keep pushing and being patient with that, right? Being at the edge, and having, like with the Second Life, I think it's compelling enough. The interesting thing about presence experiences, presence phenomena, presence technologies, is that they don't have to be as perfect at reproducing reality as you'd expect. We respond very, very well to like primitive cues because we're wired that way and because we're willing. And just a quick example of that, and Mel Slater was kind enough to let some students that I was leading in London several years ago visit the cave that they have at UCL, and they saw several different environments, and the one that was most compelling to them, and the people showing us the system confirmed that it's true generally at the time, was this Crayola world. It's basically a drawing, like a kid's drawing with crayons of a garden. That doesn't look like a garden, it looks like a kid's drawing of a garden. But because it was interactive in simple, compelling ways, you could move around it and poke your head through the open window of a little shack, and you could use the virtual grabbers and grab a flower, pick a flower. People were just enchanted with it, and they were so engaged by it. And yet it wasn't at all like reality. But once you accept the environment as a place, as a thing that you can deal with, then you're engaged by it. So I'm not convinced that the technology has to evolve, to continue to evoke interesting kinds of presence. So. There are probably an unlimited number of experiments that I'd like to do. There's not one particular thing that occurs to me at the moment that oh, I wish I could do this. The general dissatisfaction goes back to your last question, which is by the time you get the technology in your lab, so that you can do the study that you envision as being the great study, there's a new version out that's better, more expensive, whatever that you don't have, and so to an extent I've been frustrated by that problem. We have a mind lab at Temple, but it's been like pulling teeth to get the process going so that we would have the latest, and we still don't have the latest technology to do what we'd like to. So I mean, I don't know if the viewers of this will be familiar with the Mind Lab consortium of labs around the world that Frank Baioca is the head of the Michigan State campus is where the headquarters Mind Lab is. But the promise of that plan, that model for how to do research that he had of distributing research across campuses around the world is that some places have the technology, some places have certain kinds of expertise, and to the extent that they can collaborate, which is becoming easier obviously through some telepresence technologies, that gives you great potential to accomplish the kind of experiments that people want to do. So I'm hoping that kind of thing is in the future, and so even though we may not have a cave at Temple, we can design a study with people who do and have them run subjects, and then we do other things for them, and that would really, I think, advance presence research, and specifically, and just research in general. So. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think, I think there's already a huge problem with the term reality and what it means, because you often, when you're writing about presence things, you have to put real in quotes, because people may mean real as in the existing world, and they may mean real as in it's not mediated, you know? And so there's mediated and not mediated versus real and unreal, and you know, real or unreal in what respect? You know, it's not just simply, if you have to define your terms, you know, to even have the discussion. So if real is corresponding to something that exists as it exists in the physical world that we think we know, you know, then it's very easy to get confused, because we are not experiencing the world directly. We're experiencing it through our senses, and so everybody experiences it a little different. I have very poor vision, correctable only to 20/50. So I see the world by most people's standards in a blurry form. You know, and if I had color blindness of various types, then I would see the world differently. And of course, that's just one sense. Imagine all the ways your senses can be different. Not to mention the fact that when you have an experience, you attach all of the things that lead you to, you know, all of your experience and background leads you to experience and interpret something in a specific way. It may be very similar to other people, but it's not going to be identical. So we don't even agree on what's real. You know, we think we do, and you can make the shorthand and say, okay, this is real, but it's a deeper problem than that. So already we have that. And then if you build in these sophisticated technologies that are designed to confuse you, then yes, I think you can say already we have a problem. Like the first time I saw on football games where they were putting the yard line in for the first down or something, or even worse, because you can pretty well, if you use your knowledge of football, you can say, well, they can't have that. That must not be part of the field. They must have added that somehow. But when they put ads on billboards that aren't really in stadiums, or they put it on the grass in the center of the football field, I don't know. I've not been there. You know, I don't realize that people in different TV markets are seeing different ads. So I'm already confused. I am positive that I have confused reality because of technology that we would call telepresence technology already. So it can only get worse. Or better, exactly. You don't want to be a cynic. It may be good. But again, back to the ethics question, you have to be given the notice. You know, you have to be allowed to make that decision. And as soon as you're not, then it's potentially bad. So. I don't particularly think so. I think it's changed more it may have changed my view of the world as it's evolving, you know, where I think things might go, because I'm more aware of and thinking more about the technologies and the way they're developing. But I don't think I see the world substantially differently. Like even when I was not focusing specifically on presence, my background is in communication, so I'm interested in and thinking about the perceptions that people have of each other and how they get confused, and you know, the parasocial interaction and relationships comes from the communication literature, not just the presence literature. And so I was already sort of thinking in some of those terms, but it's definitely changed between telepresence and my interest in science fiction and just thoughtful fiction. And so this project about telepresence portrayals, combining my interest in those novels and TV shows and movies that portray this kind of experience, and my interest in the experience, has definitely made me maybe more concerned about, not cynical about, but more concerned about how the world will look in 10, 20, 30 years. You know, it's great, exciting possibilities, but also, you know, worries, because knowing human nature as I do, you know, there's great potential for good, but also great potential for bad. So I think that has been heightened by my interest in presence and my interest in all these, you know, everything from the Twilight Zone to the latest, you know, futuristic sci-fi action things. So. is basically what is the role of media, defined as technology, in altering, enriching, or harming human experience. You know, what is the form of what are the roles of media, in parentheses technology, in altering, enhancing might be a better way of altering, enhancing, and lessening. I don't know what a good word is for harming a human experience and human communication in particular. You know, that goes back to my initial interest in communication in the first place. You know, I've always been interested in the media since I was a kid, television and movies and newspapers, and now the more sophisticated media that we're exploring in the telepresence literature. And the reason I'm interested in it and the question I have about it is, how can it and is it and will it change the nature of human face-to-face, you know, intimate and personal and professional and organizational, any sort of communication? Because I think that's the fundamental nature of being alive, being a human person. And so we've devised all these incredible tools, becoming more and more sophisticated, especially in just the last little bit of human history. How are we going to use that? How is that already? How can we use that to change the nature of our experience? Because to me, that's the most powerful, other than medical things, which are obviously more important, keep us alive, but that's the most powerful way I think we have of altering our experience, and that's just a fascinating thing to me, so that's what I want to know more about. Not that it's a question that can be answered in, you know, here's my one paragraph answer to the question, but that's what I want to know.